The suitcase hit the wet pavement so hard that the zipper burst open, spilling my late husband's folded shirts into the rain-soaked street, while neighbors stood frozen on their porches, watching my humiliation unfold like a silent horror film. "We don't have room for you, old parasite," Jessica screamed from my own doorway, her perfectly manicured finger jabbing toward the curb where my belongings now lay scattered like garbage. "You've sucked this family dry long enough. Go find some nursing facility that takes charity cases." My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I stared at the woman wearing my late mother's pearls, the pearls I'd given her on her wedding day. The rain mixed with something warm on my cheeks, but I couldn't tell anymore if they were tears or just water. Before I tell you how I ended up standing in the rain outside the home I built with my own hands, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now, leave a like on this video, and drop a comment telling me what state or country you're watching from. Because what happened to me could happen to anyone, anywhere, and I want to know my voice is reaching people who understand what betrayal really feels like. My name is Margaret Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 72 years old, and until 3 hours ago, I believed that sacrificing everything for family meant they'd protect you when you became fragile. I was born in Charleston, raised my son Daniel in the 2-story colonial house my husband Robert and I purchased in 1978, and spent 43 years making that place a home filled with Sunday dinners, Christmas mornings, and the kind of love you can't buy. But standing there on that October evening, watching Jessica's silhouette disappear behind my own front door, while my son, my only child, stood silent in the hallway like a stranger, I realized the truth arrives too late for some of us. The seeds of this nightmare were planted 5 years earlier, the day Robert's heart gave out in our garden, leaving me alone with a house full of memories and a family I no longer recognized. Robert died on a Tuesday morning in May, his hands still dirty from planting roses along the back fence. I found him there, slumped against the garden shed, his face peaceful like he'd simply decided to rest for a moment. The paramedics said it was instant, a massive cardiac arrest that gave him no warning, no chance to say goodbye. One moment he was alive, planning our anniversary dinner for the following week. The next, he was gone. I remember the funeral more clearly than I wish I did. The way Jessica kept checking her phone during the service, the whispered conversation between her and Daniel in the church parking lot that stopped the moment I approached. At the time, I thought grief made people act strangely. I told myself they were processing their pain in their own way. I was wrong. Your mother's sitting on a gold mine and living like it's 1985. I heard Jessica say to Daniel 3 weeks after we buried Robert. I'd come downstairs for water, and their voices drifted from the kitchen, where they sat with coffee and what they thought was privacy. That property could sell for $800,000 easy. I stood in the hallway, my bare feet cold on the hardwood floor Robert had refinished the summer before he died, and listened to my daughter-in-law calculate my worth. "She's not ready to talk about moving," Daniel said, but his voice held no conviction. "Give her time." Time. Jessica laughed, sharp and cold. "Danny, we're drowning in debt. Your business failed. We maxed out 3 credit cards keeping up appearances. Your mother is sitting in a house worth nearly $1 million while we're living paycheck to paycheck. How much time are we supposed to give her?" I should have walked into that kitchen right then. I should have demanded answers, set boundaries, protected myself. Instead, I crept back upstairs and lay awake until dawn, trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood. That's what they count on, you know. Our instinct to give family the benefit of the doubt. Our reluctance to believe the people we love could hurt us deliberately. 2 months after Robert's death, Daniel showed up on a Sunday afternoon with real estate brochures. "Mom, we're just worried about you rattling around in this big place all alone," he said, spreading glossy photos of senior apartments across my kitchen table, the same table where I'd fed him breakfast every morning of his childhood. "Maybe it's time to think about your options." Options. He made it sound like freedom, but his eyes were counting square footage. "This is my home, Daniel," I said quietly. "Your father and I built our life here." "Dad's gone, Mom." Jessica's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Don't you think this big house is too much for someone your age?" Someone my age, as if turning 67 had made me incompetent overnight. I found the real estate brochure, hidden in my kitchen drawer a week later. Jessica's handwriting covered the margins, calculations, projections, notes about inheritance advance and equity release. But what made my blood run cold was the date printed at the bottom, April 28th. Robert died May 3rd. They'd been planning to sell my home before my husband's body was even in the ground. The next 2 years felt like watching myself disappear in slow motion. It started small, Jessica offering to help with my bills because managing finances was so stressful for someone in my position. I was still numb from losing Robert, still waking up reaching for him in an empty bed, so I let her. It seemed kind, thoughtful, even. I didn't notice when important documents started going missing. My insurance papers. Robert's will, the deed to the house that I'd kept in our bedroom safe for 40 years. "Mom, you probably just misplaced them," Daniel said, when I asked. "You've been forgetful lately." Had I? I started second-guessing every thought, every memory. When Jessica found my reading glasses in the refrigerator, glasses I had no recollection of putting there, she exchanged a meaningful look with Daniel that I pretended not to see. "Maybe you should see a doctor," she suggested, her voice dripping with false concern, "just to be safe." The gaslighting was so subtle, I didn't recognize it as abuse. They'd mention conversations I couldn't remember having, they'd move my belongings, and act surprised when I couldn't find them. At dinner parties, Jessica would interrupt me mid-story. "Oh, Margaret, you already told us that story twice tonight. Are you feeling all right?" The guests would shift uncomfortably. Daniel would touch my hand with exaggerated gentleness, and I would feel shame burning through me, wondering if my mind was truly failing. "Mom, I think we should set up a power of attorney," Daniel said one evening, sliding papers across the dining room table. "Just in case something happens. It's standard stuff for people your age." People my age. When did I become a category instead of a person? I signed. God help me. I signed those papers because I trusted my son, because I believed family meant protection, not predation. She signed it. I heard Jessica whisper to Daniel that night through the thin wall between our rooms. "The house is practically ours now. We just have to wait for the right moment." My hands shook so badly, I had to grip the bedsheets to keep them still, but I didn't confront them. Fear had already taken root in my chest, spreading like ice through my veins. They started erasing me from my own home. Robert's study, the room he'd spent 30 years filling with books and memories, was emptied one afternoon while I was at the grocery store. When I came home, the shelves stood bare, his favorite chair gone. "We donated it all," Jessica said casually, not looking up from her phone. "You weren't using that room anyway. We need the space for storage." I found my favorite teacup, Robert's last birthday gift to me, shattered in the trash. Family photos disappeared from the walls, replaced by Jessica's modern art that made the house feel like a stranger's home. My bedroom gradually shrank as Jessica stored things in my space, boxes of her belongings crowding me into smaller and smaller corners of my own life. The lock on Robert's study changed. I no longer had a key. Late one night, I woke to voices drifting up from the kitchen. My bedroom door was cracked open, and through it I could see light spilling from downstairs. I crept to the landing, my heart pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. Jessica and Daniel sat at my kitchen table with a man I'd never seen before. Papers covered the surface between them, papers with my signature, though I had no memory of signing them. "Once she's declared incompetent or moved to assisted living, the transfer will be seamless," the stranger said, his voice clinical and cold. "The house will be yours free and clear." I gripped the banister to keep from falling. My own son, my own child, plotting to have me declared insane so he could steal everything Robert and I had built. That night, something inside me broke. Or maybe it finally healed. The fog of grief and confusion lifted, replaced by crystalline clarity. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being systematically destroyed by the people I loved most. I found bottles of medication in my bathroom cabinet that I'd never been prescribed. Small white pills with no labels, hidden behind my toothpaste. Later I'd learn they were sedatives. Jessica had been crushing them into my evening tea for months, making me groggy and confused, manufacturing the very symptoms they claimed proved my incompetence. My doctor appointments were rescheduled without my knowledge. When I called to confirm, the receptionist sounded confused. Mrs. Whitmore, your son called last week and canceled. He said you were too unwell to come in. The stove incident was the worst. I came downstairs one morning to find Jessica screaming, smoke pouring from the kitchen, a pot burned black on the burner. You left it on all night, she shrieked, her face twisted with theatrical concern. Mom, you could have burned the house down. You could have killed us all. I stared at that pot, at the perfectly staged scene, and something cold settled in my chest. I hadn't cooked anything the night before. I'd gone to bed at 9 o'clock, after my usual cup of tea, the tea Jessica always insisted on making for me. I didn't. I started. But Daniel was already on the phone, his voice urgent and worried. Yes, we need someone to come evaluate her. She's becoming a danger to herself and others. A geriatric psychiatrist arrived that afternoon, unannounced and unwelcome. Dr. Sanders had kind eyes but asked questions, designed to make me sound confused. Mrs. Whitmore, your son tells me you've been experiencing memory lapses and confusion. Can you tell me what year it is? I know exactly what year it is, I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. I also know what you're trying to do. But even as I spoke, doubt crept in. Had I left that stove on? Were my memories reliable? The sedatives Jessica had been feeding me made everything foggy, made me question reality itself. Mom, we're worried about you, Daniel said, his false concern perfectly practiced. You're not yourself lately. We just want to make sure you're safe. My sister Helen called that week. I hadn't spoken to her in months, though I couldn't remember why. Margaret, Danny told me, you have dementia, she said, her voice breaking. He said you don't recognize anyone anymore, that you didn't want visitors. Why didn't you tell me yourself? The room spun around me. Helen. I don't have dementia. I never said I didn't want to see you. Daniel lied. But she'd already hung up, crying too hard to listen. They were isolating me, cutting me off from anyone who might question their narrative, anyone who might help. I was alone in a house full of people who wanted me gone. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the frightened, doubting woman staring back. My hands trembled constantly now. My face looked gaunt, aged 10 years in 10 months. Someone had turned the family portrait in the hallway, so my face pointed toward the wall. I heard Jessica on the phone, her voice carrying through the thin walls. The old bat actually thinks she's losing her mind. She laughed, cruel and casual. Another month of this, and we'll have her in some state facility while we renovate her house into our dream home. Daniel feels guilty, but he'll get over it once we're living mortgage-free in $1 million property. Something inside me snapped, not into breakdown, but into crystalline clarity. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being systematically destroyed by the people I loved most. And for the first time in 3 years, instead of crying, I felt something cold and sharp settling into my chest, the will to survive and the hunger for justice. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I smiled at breakfast. Jessica and Daniel exchanged confused glances as I calmly ate my toast, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the entire night awake, and I'd just made a decision that would destroy them both. The frightened elderly woman they'd been tormenting was gone. What remained was something far more dangerous. A mother with nothing left to lose. Mrs. Chen from next door had always been kind to me, back when I was still allowed to have friends. I waited until Jessica and Daniel left for the afternoon, then walked across the street with my heart pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. Mrs. Chen, I need help, I said when she opened the door, and I need you not to tell anyone. She looked at me for a long moment, then pulled me inside. That afternoon, I ordered a small recording device online using Mrs. Chen's computer. She helped me set up a new email account. Daniel and Jessica didn't know about. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, capable, clear-headed, strong. The device arrived 3 days later in Mrs. Chen's mailbox. It looked like a decorative brooch, the kind elderly women wear on their cardigans. Robert had given me one just like it years ago. Jessica and Daniel wouldn't look twice. I started wearing it every day, recording every conversation, Every cruel comment, every whispered conspiracy. My hands no longer trembled when I pinned it to my collar each morning. I had purpose now. I had a plan. I called my late husband's attorney, James Morrison, from Mrs. Chen's phone. He'd handled our estate planning for 20 years, had been at our wedding, knew our family history. "James, I need to see you," I said. "And I need Daniel not to know." His office was downtown, in a building I hadn't visited since Robert died. Walking through those doors felt like stepping back into my own life, reclaiming space I'd let others steal. "Margaret," James said when he saw me, his face creasing with concern. "My God, what's happened to you?" I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Do you have proof?" he finally asked. I pulled out the recorder and played him, Jessica's voice. "The old bat actually thinks she's losing her mind." James's face went pale. "Margaret, these signatures aren't yours. This is elder fraud. We can have them arrested." "Not yet," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "I want them to believe they've won. I want them to feel safe." Over the next 3 months, I became an actress in my own home. I played the confused, declining elderly woman they expected to see. I let Jessica help me with more paperwork, signing documents with a shaking hand while the brooch on my collar recorded every word. I pretended not to notice when they discussed their renovation plans in voices they thought were whispers. But at night, I documented everything, every forged signature, every stolen dollar, every lie they told to my doctors, my family, my friends. I reconnected with Helen through Mrs. Chen's phone. When she heard the truth, heard the recordings of Daniel lying about my condition, she wept. "Danny told me you had dementia and didn't recognize anyone anymore," she sobbed. "I should have known he was lying. I should have come anyway." "You're here now," I said, "and I'm going to need you." James Morrison hired a private investigator. Within 2 weeks, we had evidence of Jessica's affair, Daniel's gambling debts, their desperate financial situation. They weren't just greedy, they were drowning, and my house was their only lifeline. The bank statements James obtained through legal channels showed systematic theft, totaling $237,000 over 23 months, forged checks, unauthorized transfers, money drained from accounts Robert and I had spent 40 years building. "Margaret, with this evidence, we can charge them with elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy," James said, spreading papers across his desk. "We're talking years in prison and full restitution." I looked at the mountain of evidence we'd compiled: 47 recorded conversations, bank statements, forged documents, medical records proving I'd never been incompetent, toxicology reports showing the sedatives in my system, testimony from neighbors who'd witnessed the abuse, photos of my belongings thrown in the street. My hands were steady as I touched the papers. Robert's wedding ring, which I wore on a chain under my clothes like armor, felt warm against my chest. "I want everything," I said quietly. "The house, every stolen dollar, and I want them to know it was me. I want them to understand what they destroyed." The private investigator leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, they're $300,000 in debt from gambling. They needed your house to survive. This was never about inheritance. It was about desperation." I thought about that. About how desperation had turned my son into a monster. About how I'd raised him alone after Robert's first heart attack, sacrificed my retirement savings to pay for his wedding, his failed business, his mistakes. About how none of that mattered when he needed money more than he needed a mother. "When do you want to move forward with legal action?" James asked. I looked out his office window at the city, where I'd spent my entire life, where I'd raised my son, where I'd buried my husband, where I'd nearly lost myself. "Not yet," I said. "They're planning something big. I can feel it. I want to let them take their final step. I want them to commit fully to destroying me, and then I want to watch their world collapse in a single day." The eviction happened on a Tuesday, exactly 3 years after Robert died. I knew it was coming. I'd heard them planning it for weeks through the recorder hidden in my brooch, but knowing didn't make it hurt less. Daniel announced it at breakfast, his voice rehearsed and emotionless. "Mom, Jessica and I have decided it's time for you to move into assisted living. We found a place that can handle your condition." I looked at my son, this stranger wearing my child's face, and played my part perfectly. "My condition?" My voice shook just right, confused and frightened. "Daniel, I don't understand. This is my home." Jessica's face twisted with theatrical patience. "This W's your home. Now it's ours. We've been patient long enough with your deteriorating mental state." Through the window, I could see Mrs. Chen on her porch, phone in hand, recording everything just as we'd planned. Mr. Patterson, the retired judge from next door, stood in his yard with his arms crossed, watching with obvious disapproval. Helen's car was parked around the corner, waiting. Everything was in place. "But where will I go?" I asked, letting my voice break. "That's not our problem anymore," Jessica said, already pulling my suitcase from the closet. The suitcase I'd packed myself the night before with Robert's shirts and my most treasured photos. "We've been more than generous, letting you stay this long." Daniel carried my belongings to the curb without meeting my eyes. Neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the commotion. The mail carrier stopped mid-route, her face shocked. A police officer drove by slowly, taking note. Perfect. Witnesses everywhere. Jessica threw the last suitcase so hard it burst open, spilling Robert's carefully folded shirts into the rain-soaked street. The shirts I'd washed and folded just hours ago, knowing exactly how this would end. "We don't have room for you, old parasite," Jessica screamed from my doorway, her perfectly manicured finger jabbing toward the curb. "You've sucked this family dry long enough. Go find some nursing facility that takes charity cases." Mrs. Chen gasped audibly. Mr. Patterson shook his head in disgust. The mail carrier pulled out her phone, recording. My hands shook. Not from fear this time, but from the effort of not smiling. Every word was being captured by 3 different devices. Every witness was seeing the truth of what they'd done. "Daniel," I said quietly, looking at my son one last time, "please." He stood in the hallway, silent as a stone, while his wife screamed at his mother in the rain. The boy I'd raised would have protected me. The man he'd become just watched. The door slammed. Through the window I could see Jessica already measuring for new curtains, her face flushed with victory. Helen's car pulled up to the curb. She jumped out, her face wet with tears, and wrapped her arms around me. "Are you okay?" she whispered. I looked at the house where I'd spent 43 years, where I'd raised my son, where I'd buried my dreams along with my husband, where I'd nearly lost myself. "I'm better than okay," I said quietly. Just for her, I just gave them enough rope to hang themselves, and they tied the noose themselves. Now we wait 3 days, just 3 days, and they'll wish they'd never been born. Helen's guest room smelled like lavender and safety. That first night after she'd gone to bed, I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar mattress and let myself break. The sobs came from somewhere deep and primal, years of suppressed grief and rage pouring out in waves. I cried for Robert, who'd never know what his son became. I cried for the Daniel I'd raised, who died somewhere along the way and been replaced by a stranger. I cried for myself, for the years stolen, the dignity destroyed, the trust shattered. But when the tears finally stopped, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Clean, empty in a good way, ready. Helen found me the next morning making coffee in her kitchen. My hands steady, my eyes clear. "How are you?" she asked carefully. "I'm ready to finish this." James Morrison's office that afternoon was filled with evidence, boxes stacked like building blocks of justice. The prosecutor he'd brought in, a sharp-eyed woman named Caroline Davies, reviewed our materials with growing disbelief. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've been prosecuting elder abuse cases for 15 years, she said. "I've never seen documentation this thorough or crimes this brazen." She spread the evidence across the conference table, 47 recorded conversations showing premeditation and conspiracy, bank statements proving $237,000 in systematic theft, forged documents with handwriting analysis confirming they weren't my signatures, medical records from my real doctor showing I'd never had cognitive decline, toxicology reports proving the sedatives in my system, testimony from 12 witnesses, photos of the eviction, Video footage from Mrs. Chen's phone. With this evidence, we can charge them with elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy, Caroline said. We're talking years in prison and full restitution. I want everything, I said, my voice steady and cold. The house, every stolen dollar, and I want them to know it was me. I want them to understand what they destroyed. The private investigator pulled out another folder. There's more. Jessica and Daniel are $300,000 in debt, mostly from Daniel's gambling. They've already started renovations on your house using money they don't have. They've invited family and friends to a housewarming party next week, and they're planning to mortgage your house for more renovation money. I thought about that. About them celebrating their victory in my home while I supposedly languished in some state facility. About them spending money they'd stolen, living in a house they'd seized through fraud and cruelty. When do you want to move forward? James asked. I looked at the calendar on his wall. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., right when they're having breakfast in my kitchen. Caroline smiled, sharp and satisfied. We'll need police presence for the arrest. Good, I said. I want witnesses. I want the same neighbors who watched them throw me out to watch them get taken away in handcuffs. That night, Helen and I sat in her living room with tea and old photo albums. Pictures of Daniel as a baby, as a child, as the son I remembered before grief and desperation twisted him into someone unrecognizable. Do you think he'll ever understand what he did? Helen asked quietly. I looked at a photo of Daniel at 5 years old, holding my hand on his first day of school, his face full of trust and love. I don't know, I said, and I've realized I can't spend my remaining years waiting to find out. Helen squeezed my hand. Mama and Daddy would be proud of you. I'm proud of me, I said, and meant it. James Morrison called at 7 a.m. the next morning. Margaret, the police are ready. Are you? I looked at myself in Helen's mirror. 72 years old, scarred but unbroken. A survivor, a fighter. I'm ready. The police cars pulled up to my house at exactly 8 a.m. 3 patrol vehicles, lights off but presence unmistakable. James Morrison and Caroline Davies arrived in James's sedan. Helen drove me in her car, parking across the street where I could watch everything unfold. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it might burst through my chest. This was it. The moment 3 years of suffering would transform into justice. Officer Rodriguez knocked on the door. My door, the door to my house. Through the window, I could see movement inside. Jessica appeared, wearing my bathrobe, coffee cup in hand, her face shifting from annoyed to confused to terrified in the space of seconds. What the hell are you doing here? She said, when she saw me standing behind the officers. This is my house now. Ma'am, this is Margaret Whitmore's property, Officer Rodriguez said, his voice professional and cold. You're being served with a restraining order and a warrant for your arrest. Jessica's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the porch. My porch. You can't do this. We have rights. This house is ours. Daniel came rushing down the stairs, his hair disheveled, his face pale. When he saw me standing there with police and lawyers, something flickered in his eyes. Fear, recognition, understanding. Mom, what's going on? His voice cracked. There's been some mistake. I stepped forward, my voice steady and clear for the first time in years. No mistake, Daniel. The only mistake was mine, believing you were still my son. Caroline Davies held up the arrest warrant. Daniel Whitmore and Jessica Hartwell, you're under arrest for elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and theft. This is insane, Jessica shrieked. We were helping her. She was crazy. Tell them, Daniel. But Daniel just stared at me, his face crumbling as he realized what I'd done, what I'd known, how completely I'd outplayed them. Actually, James Morrison said, stepping forward with a folder full of documents, Mrs. Whitmore never legally transferred ownership of this property. Every document you forged is evidence of fraud. Every dollar you stole is documented. Every lie you told is recorded. I pulled the brooch from my collar, the one I'd worn every day for 3 months, the one that had captured every cruel word, every whispered conspiracy, every conversation. I said quietly. Every plan, every moment, you thought I was too confused to understand what you were doing to me. I heard it all. I recorded it all, and now everyone will know exactly who you are. Jessica lunged toward me, but Officer Chen caught her arm. Don't make this worse for yourself, ma'am. Mom, please, Daniel said, his voice breaking. I'm your son. We can fix this. Don't do this to your own family. The word families hit me like a physical blow. I looked at this man, this stranger wearing my child's face, and felt something inside me go cold and final. Family? My voice was quiet, but it cut through the morning air like a blade. You threw me into the street in the rain like garbage. You stole my money, forged my signature, drugged my tea, and tried to have me declared insane so you could steal everything my husband and I built. You're not my family. You're thieves who happen to share my blood. And now you'll pay for every lie, every theft, every moment of humiliation you put me through. Daniel, do something. Jessica screamed. Tell her we're sorry. I'm sorry, Mom, Daniel said, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry. Jessica pushed me into this. Don't you dare blame her for your choices, I said, my voice like ice. You stood silent while she screamed at me. You watched her throw my belongings into the street. You let her call me a parasite. This is who you chose to be. Officer Rodriguez pulled out handcuffs. Daniel Whitmore, you have the right to remain silent. The click of metal on Daniel's wrists echoed in the morning air. Neighbors had gathered on their porches. Mrs. Chen with tears streaming down her face. Mr. Patterson nodding with grim satisfaction, the mail carrier recording everything on her phone. Good, Mrs. Chen called out. They deserve everything they get. Jessica fought against the handcuffs, screaming threats and curses. Daniel went silent, his face pale, his eyes locked on mine, as if seeing me for the first time in years. As they led them to separate police cars, Jessica's voice rose in one final shriek. You'll regret this, you vindictive witch. I met her eyes without flinching. The only thing I regret is the years I wasted loving you. The police cars pulled away, carrying my son and his wife to a fate they'd earned through cruelty and greed. The neighbors slowly dispersed, some crying, some applauding quietly. Helen wrapped her arm around my shoulders. I stood on my porch, my house, my home, and felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Safe. James Morrison approached with another folder. Margaret, there's one more thing you should know. Jessica and Daniel took out a $200,000 loan against this house using forged documents. The bank is coming after them for fraud, and their creditors are circling. They didn't just lose their freedom today, they lost everything. I looked at the house they'd already started destroying with their renovations, at the home Robert and I had built with love and sacrifice. Good, I said quietly. Let them feel what it's like to have nothing. Let them know what they did to me. The courtroom was packed 3 months later. Media filled the back rows, cameras ready. Neighbors sat in the gallery. Mrs. Chen, Mr. Patterson, the mail carrier. Helen sat directly behind me, her hand on my shoulder like an anchor. Daniel and Jessica sat at the defense table in orange jumpsuits, looking smaller somehow, diminished. Jessica's perfectly manicured nails were gone, her hair limp and dull. Daniel wouldn't meet my eyes. Caroline Davies stood before the jury, her voice clear and strong. This is a case about a mother who gave everything, and a son who took everything, including her dignity. She played the recordings. Jessica's voice filled the courtroom. The old bat actually thinks she's losing her mind. Another month, and we'll have her in some state facility. I watched the jury's faces shift from neutral to horrified, watched them look at Daniel and Jessica with disgust. The financial expert testified next, explaining how they'd systematically stolen $237,000 over 23 months through forged checks and unauthorized transfers. Dr. Harrison, my real doctor, took the stand. I examined Mrs. Whitmore extensively after these allegations came to light. There was never any cognitive decline. She was being deliberately drugged to appear confused. Mrs. Chen cried on the witness stand. I watched them throw her belongings into the street like she was trash. Her own son stood there and let it happen. Helen's testimony broke my heart. My nephew told me my sister had dementia and didn't want to see me. He stole 2 years of our time together because it was easier to isolate her than to let her have support. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand, on shaking legs, my hand on Robert's wedding ring under my blouse. The courtroom went silent. "Mrs. Whitmore," Caroline said gently, "please tell the jury what happened." I looked at the 12 faces watching me, at the reporters with their notebooks, at the neighbors who'd witnessed my humiliation, at Helen who'd never stopped believing me, at Daniel, who finally met my eyes. "I gave Daniel life," I said, my voice steady, despite the tears streaming down my face. "I raised him alone after his father's first heart attack. I sacrificed my retirement savings to pay for his wedding, his house down payment, his business failures. And when I became vulnerable, when my husband died and I needed protection, my son didn't protect me. He preyed on me." My voice broke, but I kept going. "That's not forgetfulness or confusion. That's calculated cruelty. They didn't make a mistake. They made a choice. Every day for 3 years they chose to destroy me. And I want them to understand what that choice cost." The defense attorney tried to shake my testimony. "Mrs. Whitmore, isn't it possible you misunderstood your son's intentions?" I looked at him directly. "I understood perfectly when his wife called me a parasite and he said nothing. I understood when they threw me into the street in the rain. There's no misunderstanding cruelty." Jessica had an outburst. "She's lying. She was crazy. We were trying to help her." Judge Martinez's gavel cracked like thunder. "Mrs. Hartwell, you will remain silent or be removed from this courtroom." Daniel finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I'm sorry. I was weak. I let Jessica convince me. I looked at my son and felt nothing but emptiness, where love used to live." "You were weak when it mattered," I said. "That's not an excuse. That's a choice." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, their faces were set and certain. "On all counts," the forewoman said, "we find the defendants guilty." The courtroom erupted. Jessica collapsed, screaming. Daniel just sat there, tears streaming down his face, looking at me like he'd lost something precious and only now realized it was gone. Judge Martinez's voice cut through the chaos. "I have presided over many cases, but rarely have I seen such calculated cruelty toward a vulnerable family member. This was not a crime of passion or desperation. This was systematic abuse and exploitation." She looked at Jessica and Daniel with something like contempt. "Jessica Hartwell, you are sentenced to 8 years in prison, full restitution of all stolen funds, and a permanent restraining order preventing any contact with Mrs. Whitmore." Jessica's screams echoed off the courtroom walls. "Daniel Whitmore, you are sentenced to 6 years in prison, full restitution, and a permanent restraining order. Additionally, you forfeit any and all inheritance rights to your mother's estate." As the bailiffs led them away in chains, Daniel turned one last time to look at me. I met his eyes without flinching, without tears, without forgiveness. He opened his mouth as if to speak. But I simply shook my head. There were no words left between us. The boy I'd raised was gone, and the man who remained was a stranger who would spend the next 6 years learning that actions have consequences. I turned away first, and for the first time in years, I walked out of a room with my head held high. My first night back in my house. I walked through every room, touching walls, remembering the renovations Jessica had started were half finished, ugly scars on a home that had once been beautiful. But it was mine again. Legally, irrevocably mine. Helen helped me remove Jessica's modern art from the walls. We repainted together, choosing colors Robert would have loved. Neighbors brought meals, offered support, helped restore what had been destroyed. "How does it feel to be home?" Helen asked one evening as we sat in the kitchen drinking tea. "Like waking up from a nightmare," I said. Except the nightmare was real and lasted 3 years. The media coverage was intense. Local news ran stories about elder abuse. Using my case as an example, a reporter from the Charleston Post asked for an interview. "Mrs. Whitmore, what would you say to other elderly people facing abuse from family members?" I thought about that question carefully. Document everything, trust your instincts, and know that you deserve dignity, no matter how old you are or how much your family makes you doubt yourself. You're not crazy. You're not a burden, and you deserve better. The article went viral. My phone, the new one Helen had helped me set up, filled with messages from strangers sharing their own stories of family betrayal. Women who'd been gaslit by their children, men who'd been financially exploited by relatives, elderly people who thought they were alone in their suffering. I started a support group. We met weekly in my living room, 12 people at first, then 20, then 30. Survivors of elder abuse, all of us learning to trust ourselves again, to rebuild lives that had been systematically destroyed. Mrs. Chen came to every meeting. "You're a hero, Margaret. You stood up when most people would have just accepted it." "I'm not a hero," I said. "I'm just a woman who refused to disappear." The restitution money arrived 4 months after the trial, $237,000 in stolen funds, plus $163,000 in damages and legal fees. $400,000 total. I sat in Robert's restored study, looking at the check, thinking about what it represented, not just money, but justice. Validation, proof that what happened to me mattered. I established a trust to protect the house from future exploitation. I updated my will with ironclad protections. I made sure that what happened to me could never happen again. Helen asked one evening, "Do you think Daniel will ever understand what he did?" I looked out the window at the garden where Robert had died, where I'd planted new roses that spring. "I don't know," I said honestly. "And I've realized I can't spend my remaining years waiting to find out." 3 months after the trial, a letter arrived from the state prison. Daniel's handwriting on the envelope. It sat on my kitchen table for 3 days while I decided what to do with it. I finally opened Daniel's letter on a Sunday morning, sitting in Robert's favorite chair by the window. My hands were steady as I broke the seal. The letter was 3 pages long, his handwriting shaky and small. "Mom," it began. "I know you're angry, but you have to understand the pressure I was under. Jessica manipulated me too. I was trying to protect you in my own way. The gambling debts were crushing us. I felt like I had no choice. Please visit me. Please give me a chance to explain. I'm still your son." I read it twice, looking for genuine remorse, for real understanding of what he'd done. I found only excuses, justifications, the same manipulation wrapped in different words. He was still trying to make me responsible for his choices. I sat with that letter for a long time, watching sunlight move across the garden, thinking about the boy who'd held my hand on his first day of school, the teenager who'd cried at his father's funeral, the man who'd stood silent while his wife called me a parasite. "He's still my son," I said aloud to the empty room. The boy who held my hand on his first day of school, the teenager who cried at his father's funeral. When did he become someone I don't recognize? But he was also the man who'd chosen money over his mother, who'd drugged my tea, who'd forged my signature, who'd watched me thrown into the street in the rain and done nothing. Helen came over that afternoon and found me still sitting with the letter. "Are you going to respond?" she asked gently. "I don't know. Part of me wants to believe he's changed. Part of me knows it doesn't matter if he has." "You don't owe him anything, Margaret. Not even a response." "I know, but I owe myself closure. I just need to decide what that looks like." I spent 3 days thinking about forgiveness, about what I owed myself versus what I owed the child I'd raised, about the difference between forgiving someone and allowing them back into your life. Finally, I wrote my response. It took 7 drafts before I got it right. "Daniel, I received your letter. I've thought carefully about what you wrote and what I need. I forgive you because carrying anger is exhausting, and I've been exhausted enough. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. You made choices that destroyed our relationship, and those choices have permanent consequences. I hope you find peace in your life, but you won't find it with me. I'm building a life now that doesn't include you, and that's not cruelty, it's survival. I wish you well, but from a distance. Goodbye, Daniel." I mailed it the next morning and felt something lift from my chest. Not pain exactly, but weight. The burden of hoping he'd change, of waiting for an apology that would never come. That afternoon, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was putting the house up for sale. Helen was shocked. But you fought so hard to get it back. I fought for my dignity, I said. I fought for justice. The house was never really what mattered. It was about refusing to let them erase me. I looked around at the home I'd shared with Robert, at the rooms where I'd raised Daniel, at the walls that held 43 years of memories, both beautiful and terrible. This house is a monument to my pain now, I said quietly. I don't want to spend my remaining years living in a museum of betrayal. I want to start fresh. Build something new. Live instead of just surviving. I bought a townhouse near Helen. Smaller, filled with light, with a garden just big enough for roses. No ghosts, no memories of cruelty. Just space for the life I was building on my own terms. As I locked the door of my old house for the last time, I whispered to Robert's memory, I kept my promise. I fought back. I survived. Now I'm going to live. And for the first time in years, living felt possible. 6 months after the trial, I stood in my new garden planting roses. The morning sun warmed my face, and I could hear Helen laughing inside the house, making breakfast. In 2 hours, the support group would arrive, 32 members now, all of us survivors, all of us learning to thrive, instead of just survive. My hands, once trembling with fear and doubt, were steady as I patted soil around the rose bush. Robert would have loved this garden. He would have been proud of me. I was proud of myself. Someone once tried to erase me. They failed. My townhouse had become a sanctuary. The walls held no painful memories, only the promise of new beginnings. My support group met here every Tuesday evening, and the living room filled with voices of people reclaiming their lives. Last week, a woman named Patricia came to her first meeting. She was 68, her hands shaking, her voice barely above a whisper, as she described how her daughter had been stealing her Social Security checks for 2 years. I don't know if I'm strong enough to fight back, she said, tears streaming down her face. I took her hands in mine, my steady hands that had once shaken just like hers. You don't have to be strong enough today, I said. You just have to be strong enough for the next 5 minutes. Then the 5 minutes after that, and I'll be here with you for every one of them. She came back the next week, and the week after that, last Tuesday, she brought a lawyer and documentation of her daughter's theft. She was pressing charges. You gave me the courage to report my daughter, she said. Because of you, I got my life back. No, sweetheart, I said, squeezing her hand. You gave yourself that courage. I just held up a mirror so you could see it. Helen joined me in the garden, carrying 2 cups of coffee. We sat together in comfortable silence, watching the roses bloom. Look at you, she said finally. 6 months ago, you were standing in the rain with your life in a suitcase. Now you're helping dozens of people find their strength. Funny how the worst thing that ever happened to me became the thing that gave me purpose. A reporter from a national news network had called last week, wanting to do a story about elder abuse prevention. They'd heard about my case, about the support group, about the advocacy work I'd been doing with Adult Protective Services. Do you have any regrets about pursuing charges against your son? She'd asked during our preliminary phone call. My only regret is that I didn't trust myself sooner, I said. I wasted 3 years doubting my own reality. I'll never do that again. The interview would air next month. My face would be on television, my story told to millions. Part of me was terrified, but a larger part knew that visibility mattered, that speaking truth about family abuse could save someone else from suffering in silence. A new friend from the community center, Linda, had asked me something profound last week. What would you say to your younger self if you could? I thought about that for a long time before answering. I'd tell her that being kind doesn't mean being weak, and that setting boundaries isn't betrayal, it's self-respect. I'd tell her to trust her instincts, document everything, and know that she deserves dignity, even when the people she loves try to convince her otherwise. My new life had a rhythm to it. Morning coffee in the garden, afternoon work with Adult Protective Services, helping other seniors navigate the legal system, evening support group meetings where we shared our stories and built community from our collective pain, and become a local advocate for elder rights legislation, spoken at community centers and senior facilities about recognizing the signs of abuse, helped 12 people successfully report family members for exploitation, watched 3 families reconcile when adult children genuinely changed and made amends. The work was hard but meaningful. Every person I helped felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I thought about Daniel sometimes, wondered if prison had changed him, if he understood what he'd destroyed, but those thoughts no longer consumed me. They were just passing clouds in a sky that was finally clear. Helen asked one morning, "Do you miss him, the boy he used to be?" "I miss the sun. I thought I had," I said carefully. "But I've realized that person might never have existed. Maybe I only saw what I wanted to see. Maybe Daniel was always capable of cruelty, and it just took the right circumstances to bring it out." That's a hard truth to live with. It's easier than the lie I was living before. The restitution money had allowed me to establish a small foundation, the Robert Whitmore Fund for Elder Advocacy. It provided legal assistance to seniors facing family exploitation, funded support groups in 3 counties, and sponsored educational programs about recognizing and preventing elder abuse. Robert would have loved that. His name living on, helping people, making a difference. I planted the last rose bush and sat back on my heels, dirt under my fingernails, sun on my face. In 2 hours, 32 survivors would fill my living room. We'd share stories, offer support, celebrate small victories, and mourn ongoing battles. But right now, in this moment, I was simply present, simply alive, simply free. Margaret Eleanor Whitmore, 73 years old, survivor, advocate, woman who refused to disappear. Someone once tried to erase me. They failed. And now, I was helping others refuse to be erased, too. If you've stayed with me through this whole story, thank you. Thank you for witnessing what happened to me. And thank you for understanding that fighting back isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your right to exist with dignity. If my story helped you in any way, if it gave you courage or validation, or just made you feel less alone, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, or if you've experienced anything similar. Your stories matter. Your voices matter. And if you're going through something like what I went through, please know this: you're not crazy, you're not a burden, and you deserve so much better. Document everything. Trust yourself. And know that on the other side of this nightmare, there's a life waiting for you. A life you get to build on your own terms. I'm living proof. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being part of this community where survivors become warriors. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, you're stronger than anyone who tried to break you.